So thanks, Nikhil. I think that's a good segue into where we are, and it's a pleasure to be amongst finance people. In fact, Vinod introduced me to the folks you guys are organizing, and all the young people, all the action across the road, and finance folks out here. So, what is important for us, at least as telcos, is who are the stakeholders, and important one is. He mentioned it's a $2 ARPU market. Ultimately, access to the internet in India is what should be at this stage of a very high concern with the government and the regulator. You see, you can talk about net neutrality provided you have people on the internet. So in terms of where the nation's priorities go, first have the access, get people onto the internet, encourage them to get onto the internet, encourage people to provide the access, and thereafter what are the models of of getting people excited in which way. So what I'll do is I'll cover a few slides in the beginning, and especially these are all finance related because I was coming here, I thought I'd just give a snapshot of that. All right. Oh, I need to do this. Okay. All right. So here's what the reality is. Where you've got about 13% of the global internet subscribers, right? That's about 900 million now. You only have about 2.7% of the revenues. Okay? So you might have numbers, but in revenue terms. So what fundamentally, my son is studying overseas, his lowest plan is a $40 plan. So what's our ARPU? It's like a $2 ARPU. So Nikhil mentioned, what is priority is to grow that $2. Because if you start chipping into the $2, it's a lose-lose. How do you grow that? So that is where, from the government's point of view, and for all policy people, because this is policy regulation, right? The other thing is, if you see, as a sector, is the health of the sector looking good? Where, it's not looking good. Revenue growth is flat, right? Some of the things that happened is this interconnect usage charge, right? So overall industry growth is flat. We have a hanging sword of the GST on us. You've already had in the budget yesterday, you have a 0.5% increase in a Krishi, a Krishi Yojana cess. You have the Swachh Bharat cess. And overall taxes from 14% will go up to 18%. That's the minimum in GST terms. So you see, where it's already a huge amount of financial stress. So the sector which has to provide the internet access for people to have the neutrality at this stage requires serious attention. Now, where do you stand in? So I guess all of us are, internet's getting consumed on the mobile device. Now, where are we out there? So we got 20% smartphones. It's growing at a rapid clip. But reality is, for next 5 to 7 years, you will still have voice as the main revenue for telcos. Yes, data will grow, but at what pace? So you have to continue while, internationally there are operators who are shutting down 2G networks, right? It won't happen in India because the feature phones will continue to rule the roost for quite some time, okay? Now, this aspect about data growth, yes, data is growing, a lot, and everybody thinks that, a whole lot of revenues are coming in. What's reality? The reality is you stand right at the bottom of the data growth out there. And if you see in the chart, below that one, is the per MB realization of the data, right? So you see that's a falling curve. So how much do I actually realize per MB? The overall quantum of MB is growing, but actual realization is falling. So again, in the data, this is supposed to have a pointer, I guess, somewhere. Yeah. So if you see that, it won't show on the screen. Yeah, okay. So basically what's happening is, if you see that the average revenue per MB, that's falling, okay? Here's where you stand. Who's putting in the money in the networks, right? Are investments coming? And if they are coming, are investors excited enough or not? Because the ROI is really slow. So all you finance folks, and finance policy people will understand this better. Ultimately, the sector has to be such which excites people to invest in it. Are stocks looking good? No, they aren't. All right. One big thing I'll mention here is this. Obviously, do you have the highways? So like Nikhil mentioned about, okay, what's the speeds that you get? Do you have the highways? You don't have the highways. You got only, tributaries or really narrow. The reason is you got more people in the field, more operators, much lesser spectrum. In fact, spectrum lying idle with the government, it's a gross national waste. It's lying there, not used. So one good news is, last week at least, is 1800 megahertz, there is some harmonization that's going to happen soon. But the point is the pace at which you want it to happen, right? If you want to get your 600 million people at 2 meg by 2020, so, हाथी की चाल चलते रहोगे तो फिर you're not going to reach there. So in terms of policy measures and support measures, what's required to grow that part? Okay. I guess that's it for my. So coming back to that, yesterday, of course, the budget's out, the TRA recommendations on spectrum out. Ultimately, what it's looking like is the government wants to milk the golden goose. If there is one sector which has provided the country and every commoner a huge amount of, let's say, benefit. I mean, the telecom sector in the last 20 years, I think, is really done a whole lot of good. It's a little unfortunate for us that, you get hit by public perception often. Of course, today, of course, there's something else. And the point is that, yes, if the sector does a lot of good, how are we looking at growing it in the next 10 years for the internet access to happen, right? So that's a major area of policy that we will need. Now, even if, I have some figures about where the budget, from communication services in the budget, 99,000 crores, where they're going to come from. There's a mega spectrum auction. The point is, even State Bank of India chairman said, why is there not a beauty contest instead of a reserve price for auctions, right? So there are major policy measures that need to be seen. And for us in India, where net neutrality is not even being defined, it's not yet defined. But you will have to see, okay, for India, for the internet access, what is required to be done. So in terms of priority, get the access in place, and thereafter have your measures in defining, okay, are there transparent traffic management rules? Yes, we are all for transparent traffic management rules. Yes, transparency should be there as to what a customer is asking for. So in that sense, of course, we were very keen that differential pricing is something that should be allowed, because that would be a catalyst. And we believe there are enough measures there in the market, whether it's, competition, competition commission or market disabuse by somebody or market abuse by somebody. There are enough legal frameworks that would keep a check on that. Again, the point is that, okay, given the rules that we have, how much currently with that 600 million, and that is, today we are at 512, your network will look very different when it will have to be a 2 meg network. So by 2017 onwards, it's supposed to be 2 meg as per the NTP. And all this digital India thing, the point is for digital India or for the internet for everyone on a feature phone for the next 5-6 years. So major review of policies, and to also get a feel of who the investors are, what are they looking at. So there we have a serious concern, because, are the investors going to be encouraged enough? And who are the people who actually invest in these networks to have? of course, what we are hearing is, there's this mention about the closed network, closed electronic network. That's something I think TRAI would clarify. In fact, I was having a word with her one day, and it didn't appear in the consultation paper because right now it's become a very important aspect of the whole tariff order. Actually, it's not a regulation, it's a tariff order, right?
It's a regulation.
It's a regulation, okay. So, the point is, in the next 2 years, or the next 3 years, what kind of policy measures that you want to facilitate the growth of the internet, and thereafter looking at all the fair practices that when users access the internet, right, are they accessing it in a manner or getting their access, in a transparent and affordable way. So affordability, of course, is a great item, right? So if a customer, the data or content plan has two ends to it. One is when you host a plan, so one is the customer paying for it or somebody else pay for it. So you'll have to see if the ARPU is $2 or if affordability is low, right? And in India, amongst the BRIC countries, we are the third most expensive in terms of data and adoption. So it is actually expensive. Now, who is it who will pay for that is the question. So that is what needs to be addressed. Who pays for data access? So if you got the folks at the bottom of the pyramid, you want to get them up faster at a rapid clip. So what are the models that are available? Is what something, we are happy to talk to anybody. What are the models that are there? And what will enable a faster adoption of the internet to happen, right? So I guess I'll leave it at that because I know that there would be more things. I'll just finish up by, we are quite curious about the 700 megahertz space and the pricing at where it's been done. So everywhere we keep saying 700 is the band that will be good for rural people and it'll have a better coverage and indoor coverage, and it's priced at 4 times, right? So much of the available money goes into capex for acquiring the spectrum. So how much of it does the government want to be left for developing the other portion of the sector? So that evidently, today I think the mobile is probably the best tax collection instrument today because it is with about 100 billion people already, right? Every paisa is accounted for. And then if you tax that, it can very conveniently be, put into the right slot. So with that, I guess I'll close at that. And